Hello, everyone, and welcome to Robert Half Real Talk, the 2026 salary trends you can't afford to miss. I'm Lorraine K. Lee, your moderator for today's session, and I am so excited to be guiding this really important and very candid conversation, especially since talking about salary or money can sometimes feel very taboo. This is our last Robert Half Real Talk of the year, and we are so excited to wrap things up with this topic that's top of mind for so many of you. As we look ahead into 2026, compensation strategy is becoming more complex and even more critical. If you are an organization that wants to be successful, you'll need to know the trends that are coming and plan accordingly. And that's exactly what today's session is all about, helping you stay ahead of the curve. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from all of you in the chat. Where are you dialing in from, and what is one thing that you're hoping to learn or clarify about compensation today? So where are you calling in from, and what is one thing you're hoping to learn or clarify about compensation today? So drop your thoughts in the comments, and I will revisit them shortly. As you're all typing in the chat, I want to introduce our amazing panelists. They will unpack the latest findings from Robert Half's 2026 salary guide and explore how leading companies are reimagining compensation to attract and retain top talent. We have a lot of topics we are going to cover today, like how companies are rethinking total compensation to attract specialized talent, how rising salary expectations are reshaping hiring conversations, why higher pay is influencing preferences for on-site work, which benefits are driving retention and performance, and how flexible work models are evolving to meet both employer and employee needs. Whether you are an HR leader, a hiring manager, or someone exploring new opportunities, you are going to leave this session with a competitive edge because you'll understand what's next in trends around compensation. So with that, let's meet our lovely panelists. We have Rob Hosking, an executive director of the administrative and customer support practice at Robert Half. With nearly 30 years in the staffing industry, Rob has deep expertise in workplace trends, compensation strategy, and talent development. We have Lachlan Ma, a technical recruiter at a firm with prior experience at TikTok, who is specializing in building engineering teams and navigating fast-paced hiring environments. He shares practical insights on salary negotiations and recruiting trends. And we have Hannah Geft, a career educator and the creator behind Hannah Gets Hired on social media. With a background in executive recruiting and job seeker marketing at Hired, which is a tech hiring marketplace, she now translates hiring trends and audience insights into practical advice that helps professionals negotiate better pay and design fulfilling, flexible careers. And as I mentioned before, I am Lorraine K. Lee. I am a keynote speaker and the best-selling author of Unforgettable Presence. And before this, I spent the first decade of my career as a founding editor at companies like LinkedIn and Prezi. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. If you have been to one of our previous sessions, you'll know I always like to start these Robert Half Real Talk shows with an icebreaker so our audience can get to know our panelists a little bit better. And so the question I came up with for today is, what has been your favorite workplace perk? And for those of you who are watching, feel free to also let us know in the chat, what is your favorite workplace perk? So Hannah, let's start with you.
Yes, I think I have to say like coaching and leadership development because it's done so much to build my career confidence, and that is everything.
That's a great one. What about you, Lachlan?
Yes, for me, I love going on business trips. Actually, when I was working at TikTok, that was the first time I ever flew business class, and now I'm an avid traveler because of that, and I feel like I can't go back to what it previously was. So business trips are the best workplace perk for me.
Yeah, it's very hard to go back, right? I think my first business trip was also when I was at LinkedIn.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about you, Rob?
I would say workplace flexibility. So having the ability to be in office, but also work in office with purpose and have flexibility to work in different locations as well, which has really been great, certainly over the last few years.
Yeah, that's a great perk. And I know something we're going to be touching on a little bit later. My favorite perk has been free food. I am not someone who likes to cook, who is good at cooking. So when there's food in front of me, it just makes life so much easier. Thank you all for that. I'm actually going to go back to the chat now and see who's calling in today. So we have, wow, just like all over the world. We have Megan from Iowa, Erica, New Jersey, Michelle from Denver. Michelle wants to know what are in-office price compensation. Tino from Indiana. Hala is in Montreal and wants to know how SME compensation strategies can compete with large organizations. We have Daphne from Calgary asking about contractor rates. Oh my gosh, so many people. And I'm going to scroll down as well to see some favorite workplace perks here. Tino says tuition coverage. Wow, that's a really cool one, Tino. Thank you for sharing. Tino says they wouldn't be able to do their master's without it. And Diana gets free tickets to concerts and NHL and NBA games. Ooh, I'm jealous. Very nice, Diana. Well, these are wonderful. Thank you all for sharing and keep sharing. We're getting inspiration from one another. Maybe your employers here in the audience. I can see what others are saying. And so with that, let's dive in because we have so much to cover today. So over the past few years, the job market has really changed a lot. One day it feels like candidates have all the leverage, and then the next, employers are calling the shots again. And it seems to me that salary always seems to be at the center of that conversation. So, Rob, would love to hear from you. Can you share one key data point from Robert Half's guide that shows how candidate pay expectations are challenging employers in 2026, and perhaps challenges that you're seeing from both the employer and job seeker perspective?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. There's been so many changes in the job market, and compensation's always right in the middle of it all. And you think about the last couple of years where the expectation for if I'm leaving my job to go to another job, I'll see an increase in my salary or I'll see an increase in my compensation. So many job seekers still have that sense that my next role, I'll earn more, or there'll be more opportunity there. And then on the employer side, it is in some instances there was definitely that increase, or we saw that increase in compensation and salary, but that started to flatten out a little bit over the last while, which is making there's a bit of a gap between expectations on the job seeker and the employer. So one of the things that from a data perspective in our research, we found that 84% of organizations indicated that they would consider higher compensation level or higher salary for very specialized skills. So someone that brings to the table unique skills, maybe those are skills in AI or cybersecurity or something that they've done that's been unique to them. And I think what's interesting in this market is there's a lot of other things that are coming to play. And for individuals looking for roles, being able to articulate what those things are. If you're in that job process or you're looking at an opportunity, you're considering a role, it's being able to articulate, what have I done? Where did I do it? What does differentiate me? Or how can I set myself apart? Because if you can demonstrate that in that process and really share those key skills or attributes that you have that do differentiate you, increased compensation can certainly come along with that. And it does help from a company perspective as they're looking for top talent in this market, for them to have a better understanding of who you are and what makes you tick. And in the world of AI, where there's a lot of things that can be coming at employers, where they're seeing job applications of people that look like they're perfect on paper, but when they get into the job discussion or the interview discussion, maybe they don't have all of those skills. And so again, being able to articulate it and differentiate is really important.
Yeah, I love that. That's such an interesting and important point around the specialized skills and knowing how to position yourself, right, to stand out. That's so key. And it reminds me of a conversation. I have a lot of friends applying for jobs now. She works in AI or has a skill set in AI. Multiple companies, going to her because it is that specialized skill and she knows how to position herself, how to present herself. So clearly demand is high for her skill set. Lachlan, I'm curious from your perspective as a recruiter, how are companies staying competitive right now?
Yes. As a recruiter, I've hired for both engineers that are of niche skill set, but also doing general hire. So I am seeing that companies are being, again, more strategic with their compensation budgets, but also besides the salary and besides the cash component, there are other factors that they're being competitive with as well. Just as Rob mentioned, 84% of managers are willing to pay more for specialized skills like AI, data analysis, or cybersecurity, whatever is considered as niche or specialized. So that shift towards skill-based pay is huge. It means organizations, they can't just necessarily rely again on flat salary bands anymore. They're starting to recognize that talent with niche expertise can drive outsized impact. So beyond just pay, companies are enhancing their total compensation mix to compete for scarce skills. So when we say like the total compensation mix, that also includes other things such as flexible work options, whether that's being hybrid, fully remote, or even when you go into office, what are they going to provide you, whether that's lunch, gyms, as well as, additional PTO, bonus stipends, and individualized benefits. So I feel that based on what I've been seeing, the smartest employers are taking a data-driven approach, really reviewing market trends quarterly rather than just annually, and tailoring offers based on skill scarcity and business needs. But also for those that are in people teams that are really assessing on what employees value, they'll take data on that and make sure that we as recruiters are selling that as a point when it comes to comparing different compensation packages in competing offers. So it's no longer just about paying competitively. It's about designing an employee value proposition that feels personalized and sustainable.
Yeah. And Hannah, what about you from the perspective of the job seeker? You're an expert in this space. What happens when perhaps offers don't meet expectations? Because I'm also seeing that from friends as well.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see that a lot with the people that don't quite have that specialized AI technical skill set that is in such high demand. I actually asked my audience this question recently. I asked of people that had received an offer past year that came in lower than expected, how did they respond? And not terribly surprisingly, about 50% said they negotiated a higher amount. But what I found notable was that the second most common responses, 36%, said they either accepted and kept looking for a job, or they declined outright and kept looking for a job. And I think this shows that when pay misses expectations, people disengage. It signals a bit of this lack of respect for market value, especially if expectations were set earlier on in the discussions. And I'm here to be the job seeker point of view. Like, finances are a very real thing for people. They're tied to very real obligations. Rent, childcare, medical costs, cost of living is increasing at rates that salary and compensation aren't always keeping up with. And not everybody has the luxury of overlooking the financial aspect of a job opportunity for the sake of what is a great role. So obviously not all companies are limited by budget, companies are limited by pay bands. If you are at an employer that can't reach that top salary amount, even going into the job offer and negotiation with transparency, with flexibility, with that willingness to work with the job seeker and align on a comp package that feels the best for both parties, that can just speak volumes to maintain that respect, even if you can't quite meet the number they wanted.
Yeah, I love the point about collaboration when discussing these things. It's not like one against the other, but ideally you're working together to get to that point, right? And I really like what you said too about, if you're not getting offered the comp that you want, it's very natural that you would feel disengaged, because it's not really even necessarily about the number, but it's what it represents, right? And that point ties in really well into a related stat that caught my eye from the guide, which is 66% of professionals said that they would be willing to work on site full time if it came with higher pay. So it really speaks to how people are now weighing compensation alongside lifestyle and flexibility, like Rob mentioned, right? That's a great perk. And so, Hannah, I have a two-part question for you. Does that line up with what you're hearing from job seekers? And what do you see as the biggest trade-offs between higher pay and workplace location preferences?
Yeah, I mean, I don't find that number entirely surprising, but I think workplace preferences are so personal. Again, going back to somebody's individual obligations and life situation. I mean, statistically, we see younger generations like Gen Z being a lot more preferential to actually being in the office. They're at this stage of their career where that in-person collaboration, that mentorship can have a outsized impact on career development. And then more established workers, parents, caregivers, value flexibility over everything. Like the in-person element doesn't have as much of an impact when they've already probably experienced that at some point and are now trying to balance work alongside everything else. I think an important thing to remember is that the cost of going into the office is not just the time that it takes. It's commuting expenses, it's childcare, it's just energy spent baking in that time, it's mental bandwidth, balancing work and everything else. And so having in-office requirements ask employees to absorb those hidden costs. So when pay is high enough, it's an offset to those costs, makes flexibility a bit easier. But if it's not, people are big, like it's an equation that they're doing. So it might drive somebody to look elsewhere. And if a company wants to bring people back into the office, they want that in-person culture. That's where articulating the why and like having that intentionality around what that in-office culture means is important. Like, are people coming in to sit on Zoom in a conference room with other remote employees, or are they doing whiteboarding sessions like with the whole team that they really can't accomplish from a computer? And another great way to make that more appealing is to offer some benefits that offset some of those hidden costs. So things like commuter stipends, childcare assistance, even flexibility around like number of days in office. So it's not impossible to get people excited about it, I think, but having it be more than just like a box checking policy can go a long way to get other people excited about it.
Yeah, that why is key, right? Otherwise, it's just an annoying mandate. But if you explain why it's good and why it's beneficial, and I know for me, being in the office earlier in my career really helped me get to where I am today and feel comfortable that I could succeed in a remote setting because I had that in-person experience. So, speaking of remote, these days, I know people are navigating that tension between remote work and compensation because there are still plenty of people who prefer to work remotely, but there are a lot of companies who want their employees in the office at least some of the time. So Rob, what are some creative ways that employers are using compensation to make on-site roles more appealing?
It's so true as you think about how the shift is happening, right? So the movement in so many organizations back into office, whether it's a hybrid 3 days, 4 days, and 5 days. And in our business, we work with thousands of organizations that tell us each time when they're looking to bring somebody on board or they're looking to hire somebody, this is a 5-day in-office role. So that we need somebody in 5 days, that's the way that it is, or we need somebody 4 days. And there is definitely a disconnect between what people are looking for. In many instances, it's I'd really prefer hybrid, or I'd really prefer if it was not 5 days a weekend. And so there is that gap that needs to be closed. And I think, Hannah, you hit some of those really well, which that flexibility piece and flexibility in a variety of ways. So flexibility could mean maybe it's staggered work hours. And so instead of necessarily being in an environment where I'm 9 to 5 or I'm 8:30 to 4:30, flexibility to come in a little earlier if it needs to be in office. If the role is in office, maybe it's earlier in the day and I leave a little earlier. Maybe I come in a little later in the day. Maybe I start at 10 o'clock, but I work a little later because that works within my the kind of work environment that I'm looking for. I think compensation, then, when you think about how does that tie in, people are looking for more generally when the requirement is in 5 days a week because it is more expensive to be in 5 days a week. And so what are some of those perks to offset, whether that's meals or things that potentially, or maybe it's 1 day a week where there's a meal that's brought in for the team, and that ties back to team collaboration. What's the purpose? Why am I in? I better know the whys, as you said, Hannah, and I better know that it ties to something that's going to help me in my role, in my career, be able to advance into the next opportunity within the organization. But I think, generally, if people see the whys and then they realize there is some benefit and a little bit of perk, and maybe that perk is maybe it's parking expense. Maybe it's some offset of their transportation expense coming to and from the role. Those are things that we certainly have heard have been well received, because not every company has a huge budget to be able to necessarily provide that. And it is, I think maybe back to your comment, it's not a one size fits all. It's very unique per the individual, and to really what works best for the individual and the company. The last thing I'd say is that this is something that if you are looking for a job, better to get it on the table early in the discussions with your prospect employer, because then you know if you're on the same page or not, and it's better to not have a surprise when you get to offer stage and realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was going to need to be in 5 days a week, or that there wasn't anything additional being offered. And then how does that align to really what you want and your expectations about that employer?
What have you seen in tech recruiting, Lachlan, especially with remote first roles?
Yeah, with remote first roles, well, I can speak on like how it works on both sides with hybrid, remote, in person. To give you some context, when I was in TikTok, we started remote because, of course, the pandemic. And then when we started to shift back into office on a hybrid schedule, it started to be a bit more competitive with getting and attracting candidates into the company based on them already having that touch of remote work, those who now prefer remote work. And also that does decrease our talent pool now that we do only consider those that are going to be physically able to go to office because they have to live in that city. Whereas right now I work in a fintech company where we are fully remote, and it's reversed. We used to actually be 5 days in office. And then now we are a remote first culture, and now our talent pool is a lot larger. So we do have a lot more, I guess, flexibility and appeal to both the candidate, but us as recruiters have more ease to be able to attract these certain candidates within different regions. So when it comes to tech recruiting, what I'm seeing is really reflected in the conversations that I have. And again, kind of what Hannah and Rob were saying in the beginning of the process, when we have the candidate calls, being super upfront about the compensation, what our benefits are, and how that really mixes and matches into someone's lifestyle. And seeing before even going to the interview process, is this something that aligns with you? Because at the end we don't want it to be the case where you go through all this effort of interviewing, and then during the offer stage, like again, these things, new things might arise. We want to make sure that everything's aligned in the beginning. So for remote first roles, compensation strategy now includes how to support distributed teams, things, again, like we've mentioned, office stipends, maybe co-working reimbursements, or asynchronous work flexibility. That the shift is that compensation is really no longer just one dimensional. It's not just how much you make, but also how your work setup supports your lifestyle. Hannah did raise a good point, though, that there are people that some don't have the luxury of being picky and choosy or with what compensation component to accept, because finances are going to be the number one priority if they have a family. If there's a lot of things that money does support in their life, which totally makes sense. But in recruiting, that just also means we're having much more nuanced conversations with candidates about what do you really prefer in a package. Is it going to be, the compensation? Is it going to be, your quality of life, autonomy? How companies quantify flexibility as a part of total rewards is definitely a bigger conversation now that we've had a touch of remote work, and how that appeals to candidates, and how when competing offers do come into play, and it's no longer just this company is giving me X amount more than you. It's also, well, this company is giving me the flexibility to work in this location, or this company is able to give me the flexibility to work overseas where my family's from for a month a year. So it's definitely a lot more complicated now from the tech recruiter's perspective, but I think it's a good thing for candidates to be able to have that flexibility, because candidates are able to be more picky about what really matches their lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm hearing a trend around customization, and we have to just make sure we know what we want as candidates. And so on that note, I want to turn to the chat because we've gotten so many great comments. I want to highlight a few here. So Diana says, when she's weighing compensation, I also take into consideration what I will gain or learn from that position that can add value to my resume. That knowledge sometimes is worth more than a dollar amount. Also, the room for growth within the organization is an important consideration. So totally agree. I know, Hannah, earlier you were saying your favorite work perk is having that coaching and that ability to learn. So super important. Lala says, personally, I remind myself it's a two-way conversation, not a performance. That mindset shift helps me stay calm and present. I'm recruiting them as much as they are recruiting me. Great mindsets. And then Laura says that she loves a discussion about negotiating. I've been ignoring jobs that are 100% or 4 days in the office, especially when days to be in the office aren't specified. We'll start considering more hybrid jobs or full in-office jobs as a negotiation number of days in office or start time, as I can't imagine driving in DC traffic to get into the office by 8:30 or 9 a.m. And time would decrease the commute by 45 minutes. So thank you all for chiming in on the chat, and please keep doing so. We love learning from you and hearing from you. I want to switch gears now, and some of us have touched on it in the chat, to talk about salary, which I think the audience is very interested to hear more about, because at the end of the day, that's still the anchor of most offers, even though we've learned that there's a lot of different factors that go into it, right, into our compensation package. I remember when I was applying for my first few jobs, salary felt like the most important thing. I didn't really understand that there were other things that could be considered as part of a full compensation package. And so I'm really glad to see that the report is highlighting that it's the total compensation package now that really can differentiate a job offer. So Lachlan, I'll go back to you. From your experience, what components of compensation packages are proving most effective for attracting top talent in 2026?
Yeah, definitely. So in 2026, I think, really just also referencing the report and everything we've been seeing, the most effective packages are those that really combine a strong base pay with a thoughtful total reward strategy, kind of what I call, the why stay factor. And also just adding in what you guys mentioned, aside from compensation as well, how does the candidate align with the team, and how does their career trajectory, how would it be boosted if they join the team? Because again, like, money is one thing, and if you are trying to, again, go into a certain industry or a certain field and you have a lower compensation package, but it does offer you more growth opportunities than, let's say, a company that does pay you a higher compensation package but limited growth opportunities, then if you think of compensation overall over the trajectory of your career, maybe even taking a leap, or quote unquote, step back into a lower compensation package to traject you into what you really want out of your career, that could give you a higher overall salary versus that first instant package with a higher salary. It's going to be, again, just wanted to, that point is career trajectory is something that is proving very effective with, in addition to strong base pay and thoughtful rewards. The salary guide really does make it clear that candidates today are evaluating options holistically, but at the same time, pay transparency with companies is really changing the game. Because in certain states, they are actually mandated to put their base salary ranges on the job descriptions now. So, recruiters, companies no longer have that power to, not necessarily, I wouldn't say exploit a candidate, but candidates do have more power in what we are extending to them and what the potential for us to extend to them is. So that's definitely a really big change that has come in the past year and is still going to go further. So I can imagine that not only will base pay ranges be transparent, but maybe even other factors of compensation, maybe equity, if a company offers that, maybe other benefits as well. Candidates already coming into interviews armed with salary data. So employers who lead with openness and a clear compensation philosophy tend to close faster and earn more trust from candidates. Ultimately, the winning offers are the ones that feel balanced, and competitive compensation, benefits that really align with people's lives, and a culture from a company that proves that they truly value employees' growth and well-being are really what I think is going to drive both success from candidates and companies in 2026 in terms of salary.
Yeah, I like what you said about open compensation philosophy. I like that. Rob, do you agree with Lachlan? Are you seeing anything different?
Definitely agree. And in our research, we found that 53% of job seekers indicated that they would consider switching a job for higher compensation or more perks. So whether that is, tied to base salary or overall compensation, definitely there's this sense of, hey, I'd make a move if it was the right role or the right opportunity, but it was going to give me a little bit more as well. And at the same time, we continue to see many people that are a little bit on the sidelines about making a job change. It needs to be the right job. It needs to be into the right role. It has to have the right culture, which are really important. I know that came up in the chat as well, that making a very holistic look at the total package, the total compensation, because there's really nothing worse than leaving a role, if you're in one today, and leaving it for just compensation, and then finding you've stepped into something that maybe isn't what you thought from a culture perspective. And when you think about your work life and profession, there's a lot of time spent at work, and so being with people that you like working with, and in an environment that you want to be in, and an organization that aligns with your values, and all of those things are so important. Yet compensation remains a real fundamental driver. And so I think as you're looking at those, at compensation, totally, and Lachlan, you mentioned this, which is it's the entire package. It's what are some of those elements within the benefits that, wow, I didn't realize there was a stipend or something in benefits for healthcare, or some additional spending accounts, or things that maybe mean a lot to me personally and could really help me, because I think that's often lost in some of those benefit packages. So really digging into what those look like, and more holistically thinking about what does it mean to me? Because again, it goes back to, it's not a one size fits all. So compensation, I would then recommend from an employer perspective, put your best offer forward first. And knowing that that's the where you need to be. Nothing worse than underwhelming somebody. So somebody sees an offer and it's like, gosh, this is well below where I thought it was going to be. And then all of a sudden the person doesn't feel as good about the role and the company. And maybe the company was just doing it so that the person would come back and negotiate a little bit more, but maybe they'll lose out on that person as well. And again, I mentioned in the chat. So best offer forward first, and let the person know that we're putting it forward, the best offer. There's opportunity for pay increase at this point. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year. When we do a review, this is what this could look like, so you can see that growth. But I think that's really important. That transparency in those conversations is really, really key.
Best foot forward. That's good advice in work and in life, Rob.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, great breakdown from you, from Lachlan as well. Lachlan, I'm curious, at your current or former company, how do you figure out which benefits make the most sense to include in a package? So we've talked about a lot of different things, right? A lot of different options that you can package together. So are you tailoring it to each candidate, or are you trying to take a more consistent approach across the board?
Yeah, in terms of benefits, at least from the companies I worked at, it's not something that we can necessarily pick and choose what benefit to give to one candidate versus the other. It's very standardized. Maybe there is, I guess, if I were to say that there is like benefits that I have seen that are more very personalized to each candidate, it's a lot of it comes from like medical or insurance packages. But in practice, how we have been able to, really take into consideration what candidates prioritize in the market now in terms of benefits, we lean heavily on employee and candidate feedback to decide what to prioritize. So I was reading in the salary guide, it really highlights that total compensation is now a key differentiator, and we see that firsthand. But rather than guessing what will resonate, we regularly again survey employees and review exit interview data to identify what benefits will actually drive satisfaction and retention. So when I say exit interview data, that's actually employees that are leaving the company. We do ask them questions about not only what their experience in the company was, but what would have possibly kept them in the company longer, and made them more satisfied in retaining them. So for example, when we did see consistent feedback around maybe burnout and balance, we have expanded flexible time off policies and mental health resources instead of introducing new perks that, just look good on paper, but don't really solve the real life pain points of what's going on with the employees in the company. So in my experience, the most impactful benefits are those that directly improve people's day-to-day life, whether that's flexibility, upskilling budgets, wellness support. We have had a lot, or in my companies I worked in, We've had platforms like Lyra, which is therapy for employees, as well as Headspace, which is an app that actually gives you guided meditations, wellness practices. So having these rather than scattered perks that don't move the needle is really how we are able to determine which benefits work in a candidate's package.
Mhm. I really like that you're talking to the employees and you're also doing exit interviews. It's always better to hear it straight from the source, right? Rather than guessing. And not all companies do exit interviews. So that's great to hear, Lachlan.
Mhm.
And Hannah, I want to hear from your community's perspective. What non-monetary perks or benefits make an offer most enticing?
Yeah, and this was another question I asked my community, and I asked it quite open-endedly actually, and got over 300 replies.
Wow, nice.
And near about 45% of people mentioned flexibility as the most important non-monetary benefit, which based on this conversation, I don't think is surprising to anybody. Second most popular was like wellness and work-life balance perks. So things like that therapy coverage, wellness stipends, holiday office closures. And I know Lachlan just talked about this a ton. Like it's kind of thinking of them as these like why stay perks or these sticky perks. Like they're the perks that acknowledge people as humans rather than just like, trying to entice them into the office or to show up at their desk every day. And, I love hearing about how a firm approaches like the discovery around what those are, because I think for a lot of companies that don't necessarily have the capacity to do all that diligence, do those exit interviews, those surveys, like there's a lot to learn from the bigger organizations that can. There's a lot of employee feedback that goes into determining those benefit packages. And then on the flip side, there's like the aesthetic office and the free food that like look nice on paper. They can get people excited about the brand, but like probably aren't going to be the thing that keeps people around in the long term. I think there's like a big trend emerging from this conversation here that the benefits people are looking for are the ones that acknowledge their humanity, acknowledge that they're juggling a lot. Like work is a massive commitment in people's lives, and everything outside of work is growing bigger and bigger constantly, it feels. And people are really looking for companies that help them feel supported in that by like acknowledging that this big trade-off that they're giving with their time and energy by showing up to this job.
And I really like what you said about the sticky perks. I haven't heard it framed that way before. And so, yeah, thank you for differentiating and explaining that. I want to call out one comment I see from Waji in the chat. He asks, what references to pay should we share during a salary discussion? Well, the salary guide is a great resource to check out and to reference in those conversations. So much research and data in there. So definitely check that out. Hannah, I want to continue the conversation with you. When we think about flexibility, what does flexibility really mean to professionals today, and how should HR leaders think about it?
Yeah, so another question I asked my community, but I think when we hear flexibility, we immediately think of remote work and hybrid work. But interestingly, in the responses that I got, 40% of people define flexibility as autonomy over their time. 20% emphasized trust from the top down, and only 15% of people focused on where they're actually showing up to work every day. And I think, people equate flexibility to being treated like adults, like being able to go pick your kids up after school or go to a doctor's appointment, or not having to ask that permission to deal with the chaos of life, not being micromanaged, not being measured by time at their desk. So in my mind, I break flexibility down into two buckets. You've got like the tactical flexibility or flexibility by policy. So, unlimited PTO, remote and hybrid work, location independence, being able to go and work in a different country for a month, like Lachlan mentioned. But then you've also got the cultural flexibility, which I think is arguably more important. Like if you're a company that offers unlimited PTO, but your managers don't support their team and don't let anybody find the space on a calendar to actually take it, that unlimited PTO policy doesn't really have any value. So modeling that culture from the top down and having it show up in the way people work together and collaborate, like providing tools to work asynchronously, providing that culture of coverage when somebody's out, are just some examples. Like that's an amazing way to prove that trust in your employees.
Yeah, and Lasagna in the chat agrees with what you just said, Hannah. She says exactly. People aren't just working for a paycheck anymore. They're looking for roles that fit their life, not just their schedule. So I think what you're saying is really resonating with the group. For our last question today, I want to make sure that we have time to discuss negotiating comp because for any job seekers in the audience, I know this is a big one. And speaking from experience, it can be really difficult, really uncomfortable. And so I'd like to ask each of you, what advice would you give to job seekers negotiating compensation in today's market? Rob, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, thanks. And it's, it really is, or it certainly can be a scary time because it's unknown, right? It's uncertain. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen when I get to this point and how do I navigate and negotiate? And I think the key is be bold, be confident, know your worth going into any job discussion. You've done your research, you've used the tools to be able to get a sense of where this should line up. Hopefully there's been some transparency in the overall process so you have a sense of what it could look like. When you do receive the offer and the opportunity, take a good look at it. Don't hesitate to go back and renegotiate in those areas that are particularly important. Does it fall in line with your expectations? Can you live with maybe where there are variants that maybe you weren't anticipating? If you can't, then don't hesitate to go back and renegotiate. The worst that can happen is somebody says no, but it's very likely they'll go back and try to do something. Generally, and maybe to my comment earlier, put your best foot forward as a company, put your best offer out there. If that isn't the case, if it is the case, great. It's still okay if somebody comes back and questions and asks and works to negotiate on that. So I would always just say, don't hesitate, even though it feels yucky. It is something that is important to do, and it's generally expected by the prospect employer.
Yeah, what a great call at the end that they're expecting you to come back with that. What about you, Hannah?
I would say do some of that self-reflection work up front, like even before you start the first interview process, get that clarity on the target compensation amount that you need to sustain your lifestyle. I like the 3 buckets, like your dream number, the realistic number that you'd want to land at, and then the walk away number. And then also factor in other benefits into that prioritization, because that'll help you clarify, what do I absolutely need to have in this job offer? If a company can't provide it, like what am I comfortable walking away from? And then what if they can't meet that one of those higher numbers that I'm aiming to get at? What other benefits matter most to me that will help bridge that gap? So prioritizing up front can help you feel confident going into that negotiation and being confident in your decisions.
Yeah, such a good call out. I feel like part of the reason negotiation is so scary is because you don't know what's going to get asked or if they come back with something. So sort of having that information in your mind makes a lot of sense. Lachlan, as the recruiter, what can you share about negotiation and maybe what's worked well with candidates that you've negotiated with before?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can do it on 2 sides, both as a recruiter and as someone who also recently was a job seeker. When you are going to be going through negotiations, it is important to really know what you want out of your next job and prioritize that. So if it is going to truly be, a higher cash portion, or, more like remote flexibility, like just know that like those are the 2 things you want to stay stern about in your offer negotiation process. Also, if you do want to be more competitive and really leverage certain factors to increase some sort of your package, bring in a competing offer. Don't try to interview with more than one company if you can, and that is going to make you seem more competitive. And when you bring in a competing offer, us as recruiters, we will really take that heavily into consideration. We will talk to the compensation partners, we'll talk to the hiring committee, and we'll say, hey, they just came in with a competing offer from XYZ company. And recruiters will work with you to hopefully get something that works for both you, as a candidate, and the company as well. And that goes into my other point, is really work with your recruiter. Recruiters, there is an kind of this energy that a lot of people feel that recruiters are just trying to lowball them, trying to reject them. But actually, as a recruiter, it only helps us if you get into the company because we are, you know, our performance is based on how many hires we make. So really work with your recruiter. I always tell my candidates at the beginning of the offer negotiation process, like, hey, just want to let you know that I'm on your team and it only helps me if you get in. So I'm going to do my best to get you something that is worthwhile for both, again, the company and the candidate. And last thing I want to lead off with, I know my answer was a bit scattered all over the place, but if you don't have a competing offer, make sure you even leverage your current compensation as well. Sometimes, candidates will either just take the first offer, but then they'll think that because they don't have a competing offer, they don't have any leverage. Your current compensation is actually just as equal leverage as a competing offer if it is more than what the company you're trying to head into is offering you. So make sure you're just thinking about different ways to leverage yourself and seem competitive to get what's best for you, whether it's in the compensation aspect with cash and equity, or whether it's going to be the benefits as well.
And great call out. And I appreciate the recruiter perspective that you want to close the candidates, right? You want them to get hired. It helps you. So just a good reminder for everyone in the audience. And perhaps I'll close out with a comment from someone who's in the audience right now, who looks like getting a lot of agreement from others. Myrtle, thank you. Myrtle says, lead with respect versus fear and intimidation. So amazing negotiation advice and general compensation advice from all of you. As we come to the close of our last session of the year, I want to give a huge thank you to Rob, Lachlan, and Hannah for sharing their expertise today. As you have seen, the compensation landscape is evolving rapidly, so having their expert insight is invaluable. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to visit roberthalf.com to access the 2026 salary guide. It contains detailed salary ranges for hundreds of positions across multiple industries, plus expanded information on all the trends we discussed today. To everyone who joined us today and any of our previous Robert Half Real Talk sessions, a huge, huge thank you for being a part of this, and we look forward to seeing you in 2026.